This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the award protest problem that's holding up the federal contracting game.
If the games were always stopped because you wanted to pause to make sure you were right, the games would be unwatchable. That's the scenario that we have in protests.
Former FedSim leader Chris Hamm on FedGov Today in just a moment. Uniting program strategy, advanced technology, process, and execution for a more efficient government. That's Maximus. Every program, every service, every time. That's innovation forward. Learn more at maximus.com/federal. The new National Defense Authorization Act the Senate Armed Services Committee sent to the floor includes a provision on bid protests. That provision's trying to cut down on frivolous protests that government and industry have complained about for years. Chris Hamm is CEO of Fin Acquisitions. He's former director of FedSim at the General Services Administration. Chris, welcome. You wrote about this on LinkedIn. You wrote, Section 816 of the NDAA has a great idea, creating a disincentive for frivolous protests, and it won't work. Why won't it work, Chris? Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Francis. The idea is something I've been advocating for my entire federal career. I mean, the idea that anybody can just stop or delay a major acquisition just because they can, file something at GAO. You understand the purpose of it. If the government does something wrong, you absolutely want to have the ability to say, hey, wait, stop, we should look at this. But what it's turned into is this just delay mechanism that creates an incredible profit incentive and just revenue incentive for the company that's currently doing the work. So this NDA provision is an idea, it's a good starting place. It says any of the profit that a company would make during this automatic stay of performance, normally it's 120 days, any of that money, the government could go and claim, they could claw it back. They could file a claim either at the Armed Services Board or at the Court of Federal Claims and say, hey, you can't benefit from this pause. We'd have to get the money back. And the post I had, which ended up getting a fair amount of attention, more than I actually intended, just said it won't work for a couple of really simple reasons. The first, so money in the government obviously has to be spent within its time, purpose, and amount. You get an appropriation, it's got to be for the thing, and you spend it by the end of the fiscal year. That's where there's that big rush at the end of the fiscal year. So if this money is tied up, and then the government says, oh, we're going to go claw it back, and it happened to be a significant amount of money. There was $20 million in potential fees that this company would have earned. By the time you would get through the filing process, the review, all of the money would expire. It would be past its period of availability. So the agency itself wouldn't be able to use it. So there'd be no motivation to really fight hard to get it. But on the other side, the company, they would fight to the end because it's $20 million. So that's real money to them that would pay to them, but it would never be realized by the agency itself. So the first is just time. If you're going to create a disincentive, it's got to be time bound the same way that GAO is time bound. So GAO has to answer within 120 days. The means of resolving that would have to also be at GAO, or if we're at these other two venues, they'd have to have the same time limitations. It'd have to be right after a decision, then here is a number. And my recommendation is it's something simpler than profit or fees. It's a number. It's a fixed price. It's a percentage. It's not something you have to calculate because the other part of this complexity is how do you know how much profit a company made? Do you take an average of what the corporate margins are? It would only work on cost contracts where the fees are explicit, and that's not where all the protests are. So it just mechanically just couldn't work the way it's currently described.
All right. To the example that you laid out a moment ago, Chris, it strikes me that actually that incentives could be exactly the opposite of what people want, because I didn't think about it before you explained it that way, but with the time factor that is involved there, the incumbent, it sounds to me, would be incented to protest as many things as they possibly could because it would take so long to adjudicate them that, as you said, the money would expire and they would automatically just keep being perpetually renewed and renewed and renewed. Yeah. And so it would have the exact opposite effect of what the intent of this was. Am I hearing you right? Am I getting it right?
It would remain the same as it is today. So like if an incumbent loses and they protest, they get a financial advantage. It would continue that same financial advantage. There's another aspect of this too that we didn't talk about, and that's around the concept of frivolousness. And so when if a company is unsuccessful and they file a protest, the argument that they make is not frivolous. Like you pay a law firm and you get, a 20-page summary that is like how dare the government violate its own rules and procedures. And there's like 4 elements of every protest. And then you have to defend against it. So the government would be in a position of saying, here's why this argument is frivolous. And, a good lawyer can say, here's why my argument isn't frivolous. And so like it doesn't create the same of course, this one is frivolous. I have a much different, simpler recommendation for how this would work. Do you watch football?
Yes, of course I do.
So, if the games were always stopped because you wanted to like pause and make sure you were right, the games would be unwatchable.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the scenario that we have in protests. The game is unwatchable and you've got to make sure everything is technically right because you can always stop it. In the NFL, coaches get 2 challenges. If they're right on 2, they get a 3rd. You get a certain number of stop the game, let's go check. And if you keep winning, then yes, obviously you have the right to keep doing it. But if you're wrong twice, you lose the right to protest. And that would do the exact goal of what we're talking about is limiting frivolous protests without all of the extra court and lawyer stuff.
All right. You hit on a couple of things in this piece, and we'll put a link to your LinkedIn piece on the show page today so folks can read it for themselves. But you hit on a couple of things here that remind me of the major complaints that I hear from companies all the time about why they protest. One of them is the delay. The other company is delaying. They lost, and they're delaying it, and we've covered that. The other one is we protested because we didn't get any information from the agency about why we lost. And so we just wanted to find out why we lost. Is it your sense that agencies are getting better, that the government as a whole is getting better at doing debriefs after awards to let companies know why they didn't win, to try to put a stop to some of these protests that happened for that reason?
So that was the argument before there was the expanded debrief rules and the informed process. There used to be a real lack of information after an award decision. There has been like incredible growth from the acquisition workforce on providing almost a full version of the award decision and the trade-offs, like the source selection documents. Almost every award today gets a really good summary of why the awardee was selected, and then why the company that lost, what their weaknesses are. It's one of those things where no matter what you say, like not getting picked is never going to feel good. Like not winning, Love is Island, you're going to be mad on the post, thing. Like no matter what, you're not going to like it. So, there's only so much you can say on why you didn't pick somebody where they're just going to like accept it. And the main reason why everybody fights over it is because like obviously the dollar amounts are big, but it's a big investment. If we could cut down on the amount of time and energy it takes in the bidding process itself, companies would protest less. Like there'd be less cost and less skin in the game. You'd walk away from it sooner. But no, the documents themselves are great. The only nuance I'll say here is that in terms of debrief and quality, they have moved almost entirely to written why we don't like you documents instead of in room, here's why you didn't win with like a human touch. It is a really awkward meeting in a live room to tell company X why their key project manager was not a good fit to the face of the key project manager. So the lawyers want it written and it becomes very stale. And so like when you get a Dear John letter, it doesn't help. Yeah. You still feel bad about it.
Here's why we don't like you. Is what these sounds like these turn into. What are the serious things that both government and industry could do, do you think, to cut those costs to bid, to drive down the price for companies to try to get business? So or does that not matter? Maybe that's not the right question to ask. Maybe that's not the government's job.
No, I mean they're doing the whole FAR rewrite, the revolutionary FAR overhaul, which is at least potentially going to change the way in which bidders and government personnel are interacting. One of the main things that is the frustration on all parties is the lack of communication. And I mean, you could do a lot of this stuff beforehand, but if your best way of buying is, I think I know what I want, but I can't tell you about it, so I'm going to write it down, and I'm not going to talk to you about it for 6 months, and you're going to guess whether or not what you're going to make works. It's just inefficient, and it's not the way that the commercial market works. You'd have to have meaningful engagement with the likely suppliers, and talk about the requirements, talk about whether or not their thing works, and let them down easy before they spend $500,000 on bidding on something. They just move on. Versus once you've spent the million pursuing it, then then you need it.
Yeah.
So they have to change communication and frequency in a way that isn't the way that the public bid system is.
While you were answering that question, the word that I scribbled down before you said it was the word requirements. And when you said it, it strikes me that's maybe the main issue, the main place where some of these changes could really make a difference, both for the government side and the industry side. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes.
What would that change look like in your view? And is the fact that at least on a lot of IT acquisitions and in some cases in weapons systems acquisition in the Defense Department, they're moving away from such stringent requirements and moving more towards statements of outcomes desired? Is that helping?
It helps, but you still need to have whatever the subject matter expertise is inside of the government, inside the weapons system manufacturer. You would still need to have dialogue on whether or not the idea will work or not work. Right now, it's a guessing game, and if you like anybody in the procurement asks a question, like the CO will say the requirement stands as written, and we're not here to deliver your solution. So the guessing part remains an issue. In other countries, the major acquisitions, let's say there are 3 shipbuilders, the 3 shipbuilders are involved in the process. They know what the constraints are. They know whether or not they can there's an acceptance that the market should have access and understanding in a way that we presently don't have.
Is the number of bid protests or the dollar value of the bids that are protested the best measure at some future point to determine if whatever reform happens worked, or are there other factors that should be evaluated to determine are we getting the outcome that we want?
I mean, so GAO puts out their annual summary, and the trends are relatively static. There's a little bit of increase here, a little bit of change in success rate there. A good measure would be, is the total number going down? The fact that it exists drives an incredible amount of administration and delay in and of itself. So the risk of a protest, the risk of a potential court case adds 2 or 3 months to the government's paperwork. And if you were to lessen the likelihood of those occurrences, they would move faster. They would document less, they would dot less I's, and they would go. So that seeing the total number go down in and of itself would be the best measure on whether or not something's working.
Chris, it's great to catch up with you. Thanks very much for sharing this on LinkedIn, and thanks for talking about it with me today.
Anytime. Thanks.
You can read more about the NDAA provision on protests on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. A roadmap is missing for 8 of the biggest legacy information technology systems in government. The Government Accountability Office's Kevin Walsh will tell you what's missing and what's next this Sunday morning on FedGov Today TV. You can watch the debut on ABC7 in Washington and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel at 10:30 Sunday morning. If you miss the debut, you can watch it anytime at fedgovtoday.com and on YouTube. The next FedGov Today podcast is coming Thursday. To make sure you don't miss it, follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows, and you can listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening.